At 7:55 in the morning in Hawaii, the first Japanese aircraft begins its attack on Pearl Harbor. In Washington, D.C., it is 1:25 in the afternoon. 5.5 hours separate those two facts. 5.5 hours between the burning and the knowing, between a harbor already in flames and a city that has not yet heard a thing. It is a Sunday in December, cold and gray in Washington. The streets are quiet, the White House running on a skeleton staff. On the second floor in his private oval study, a room filled with ship models and naval prints, bookshelves, a desk where his stamp collection sits spread open, President Franklin D. Roosevelt has just finished lunch. Harry Hopkins, his closest advisor, is sprawled on a couch across the room, thin, a cigarette somewhere nearby. And while this room exists in its Sunday quiet, 4,800 miles away in a harbor in the Hawaiian Islands, battleships are on fire. This is not a story about that attack. This is the story of the room, how the news arrived, who picked up the phone, what the most powerful men in the country said when the Pacific Fleet stopped responding, and what they understood, and what they didn't, and what it cost. By late 1941, war between the United States and Japan is not a question. It is a matter of when and where. The when. Soon. The men in Washington don't need polling to know it. They've watched the pressure accumulate for months. Japan's seizure of southern French Indochina in July. Roosevelt's response freezing Japanese assets and ending oil sales to a military that depends on American petroleum. Tokyo's choice to keep negotiating while secretly preparing to fight. So Japan's military cannot sustain itself without that oil. Tokyo has to choose between the table and the battlefield. For now, it has chosen both. The where, everyone agrees. The Philippines. The logic is sound. Japan needs the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. The road runs past the Philippines. The American naval base at Manila sits astride Japan's southern supply lanes, and American military analysts have concluded that Japan cannot mount more than one major naval operation simultaneously. The Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, 4,500 miles from Manila, across open ocean, is, by this analysis, safe. This is the bedrock on which everything rests. 5 men carry it into December 7th. President Roosevelt is 59 in his 9th year in office. Polio claimed his legs in 1921, and he has governed from a wheelchair or braced against a desk for most of those 9 years. The shoulders remain broad, the jaw set, the cigarette tilted at its characteristic angle in its long holder. His outward composure has become, after this many years in crisis, almost architectural. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, is 60. Lean, silver-haired, 4 stars on each epaulette of his olive-drab service coat. Among subordinates, he is known for being impossible to flatter and volcanic when provoked, though most never see the volcano. Admiral Harold R. Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, also 60. Stocky, square-jawed, a naval officer since Annapolis, where upperclassmen gave him the nickname Betty, which followed him for 4 decades without ever quite fitting. Once he commands the surface fleet and has spent most of the year focused on the Atlantic, where German U-boats are working over the convoys. Secretary of War Henry Stimson is 74. A former Wall Street lawyer, former Secretary of State, a man of old Yankee rectitude Roosevelt brought into the cabinet as a gesture toward national unity. He keeps a meticulous diary. 1 week earlier, on November 25th, he wrote that he had discussed the Japanese situation with the president and the question of how to, in his words, maneuver them into the position of firing the first shot without allowing too much danger to ourselves. Historians have examined that sentence for decades. Most read it as Stimson describing a potential Japanese strike on British or Dutch territory in Southeast Asia, the most expected flashpoint in Washington's view. Like it is not evidence of Pearl Harbor foreknowledge. What it is evidence of is something the diary makes plain throughout. Stimson has been watching war become inevitable for 2 years. He has been waiting for it to start. Secretary of the Navy. Frank Knox is 67, barrel-chested, a former Rough Rider under Theodore Roosevelt, a Chicago newspaper publisher who ran for vice president in 1936 on the losing Republican ticket. He is blunt, energetic, and has spent the better part of the year trying to make the Navy ready for a war everyone can see coming. At Battleship Row in Pearl Harbor, the USS Arizona sits in still water. The officers' clubs are littered from the night before. The ships are in their peacetime rows, dressed in their peacetime formations, in a harbor the planners in Washington have not worried about. The warning was there, but it arrived in pieces, too late to act on for reasons that say everything about how the day unfolded. On the evening of December 6th, the American code-breaking service begins intercepting a 14-part diplomatic message from Tokyo to the Japanese embassy in Washington. The first 13 parts are decoded and passed to the President and the Secretary of State that night. They make clear that Japan is breaking off diplomatic talks. They do not name a target. What they contain is not an attack order. What they contain is a deadline. 2 junior officers see that deadline. Lieutenant Commander Alwyn D. Kramer of the Office of Naval Intelligence and Army Colonel Rufus S. Bratton of Army G2 are responsible for distributing decoded Japanese intercepts. On the evening of December 6th, both men spend hours trying to reach someone in authority. No, they cannot. The bureaucratic machinery of Washington on a Saturday night, the social engagements, the protocol, the chain of command running at peacetime speed, proves impassable. The information sits. Just after midnight, the 14th and final part arrives. It is decoded, then set aside until morning. Sunday, December 7th. The final section is translated and delivered. It instructs the Japanese ambassadors to request a meeting with Secretary of State Hull at precisely 1 p.m. Washington time. That is 7:30 a.m. in Hawaii. A diplomatic rupture, timed to the minute, at an hour corresponding almost exactly to when Pearl Harbor would be most exposed on a quiet Sunday morning. Admiral Stark is already at his desk. He has come in early, concerned enough about the deteriorating situation to spend Sunday morning at the Navy Department. Well, he tries to reach Marshall. Marshall is not at his desk. General George C. Marshall is on a horse. He rides at Fort Myer on Sunday mornings. No aid, no radio. It has never mattered before. Officers bearing increasingly urgent intelligence spend the morning waiting for him to return. When information about the 1 p.m. appointment reaches Stark, he is urged to call Admiral Kimmel at Pearl Harbor. Call him now. Stark reaches for the telephone, then slowly puts it back down. He will call the President, he says. It is a hand on a receiver, a hesitation of seconds. Stark is operating in genuine ambiguity. A diplomatic deadline, not a confirmed attack order, a chain of command instinct pointing upward rather than outward. He is calibrated for deliberation. The situation requires reflex. The attack begins 22 minutes later. At 1:47 p.m. in Washington, the phone rings in Roosevelt's Oval Study. The White House operator announces that Secretary Knox is on the line and insists on speaking with the President. Roosevelt takes the call. Hopkins looks up from the couch. "Mr. President," Knox says, and his voice is quavering. It looks as if the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. Roosevelt's first word is no. Hopkins thinks it must be a mistake. The Japanese are mid-negotiation. An attack of this kind, at this location, fits none of the models anyone has been working from. The Philippines, yes. Hawaii, no. Roosevelt does not think it's a mistake. He says it to Hopkins, plainly, right there in the room. It was just the kind of unexpected thing the Japanese would do. At the very time they were discussing peace in the Pacific, they were plotting to overthrow it. In the first seconds after the worst military news of his presidency, His reaction is not confusion, it is recognition. He picks up the phone again. Admiral Stark calls to confirm. The language is measured, careful. The language of a man relaying shock in real time. A very severe attack, Stark reports. Some damage already done to the fleet. Some loss of life. That is all he knows. It is not nothing. It is not enough. Roosevelt works the phone. He calls Stimson, who is sitting at lunch at home. The president's voice is, by Stimson's own account, rather excited. Have you heard the news? They have attacked Hawaii. He calls Cordell Hull. He calls Press Secretary Steve Early at home. Have you got a pencil handy? Early thinks he's joking. You need it, Roosevelt says. I have a very important statement. It ought to go out verbatim. By 2 p.m., calls are going out across the city. The White House, quiet 20 minutes ago, is becoming something else entirely. Somewhere in the Pacific, the attack has been over for more than half an hour. Washington is only now learning it began. Grace Tully is Roosevelt's personal secretary. She is the human relay. Most of the news arriving at the White House on December the 7th comes by telephone from Admiral Stark at the Navy Department, and it is Tully who takes those calls. Shorthand, note by note, report by report. She starts in the second-floor hallway. The noise and confusion force her into the president's bedroom. She takes each report from Stark, types it, carries it to the study. In Stark's voice, she can hear the shocked disbelief. The reports darken in sequence. Airfields burning, aircraft destroyed on the ground, such heavy casualties. Numbers not yet known. Then, later, the Oklahoma has capsized. Hangars on fire. He shakes his head. He tightens the expression of his mouth. Eleanor Roosevelt, watching him that afternoon, will describe him as deadly calm. Tully, who knows him better, reaches for a different word. There is rage in his very calmness. Measured against that rage is the stillness, the deliberate, iron stillness of a man who has governed through the Depression, who has understood for years that this war was coming, and who is now receiving its opening in fragments over a telephone while his stamp collection sits on the desk in front of him. At 2:30 p.m., Roosevelt authorizes War Plan 46. The United States Navy is now empowered to conduct unrestricted submarine and naval operations in the waters of East Asia. The wording stops short of declaring war. The effect does not. He tells Hopkins quietly that it had been his earnest desire to complete his administration without war. But if the news from Hawaii is accurate, Japan has made the decision for him. Across the Potomac, General Marshall has returned from his ride. He arrives at his office at 11:15 a.m., more than 3 hours after the attack began. He absorbs the briefing with the face he always wears in company. He moves immediately to send a warning to the commanders in Hawaii. A warning that is, by now, a message to the past. He does not use the telephone. A call might expose the fact that the United States has broken Japan's diplomatic code. He sends the warning by commercial Western Union telegram, and it begins its slow journey west. At 3:05 p.m., the principals begin to arrive in the study. Knox comes first, then Stimson. Marshall arrives at 3:20, stepping through the door with the controlled blankness of a man who has spent 3 hours catching up to something everyone else has already absorbed. Cordell Hull is last. When Hull comes through the door, the room can see it in his face. White, by one account, as his hair. He has spent months across a table from the Japanese ambassadors, Nomura and Kurusu, threading the needle of diplomacy, while war gathered at every edge. He reports to the president in a voice described as cold as ice what he told those same envoys when they appeared in his outer office that afternoon. 2 hours into the disaster, still presenting their papers while their planes burned the harbor. And the room settles into the work of understanding what has happened and what might happen next. Knox and Stimson are cross-examined. Why did this happen? How bad is it? Can invasion follow? The Navy has been badly damaged. The Army's air strength in Hawaii is destroyed on the ground. The possibility that Japan might follow its airstrike with a move against the West Coast is raised. No one dismisses it. In his diary that evening, Stimson will record his first reaction to learning of the attack. His first feeling, he writes, was relief that the indecision was over and that a crisis had come in a way which would unite all our people. He has watched an inevitable war become politically impossible to enter for 2 years. The relief and the grief in that diary entry arrive at the same moment. Not a report arrives that a Japanese carrier has been sunk off the Panama Canal zone. The room absorbs it as fact. It is not fact. It is the informational chaos of a situation still unfolding. Wrong intelligence alongside right intelligence, nothing verified, everything moving faster than anyone can check. Roosevelt will remember it. Later, in a fireside chat, he will quietly describe the danger of trusting statements attributed to authoritative sources, pointing, without naming it, to what the room lived through that afternoon. Then, before 6 p.m., the phone rings again. Governor Joseph Poindexter, calling from Honolulu. Roosevelt takes the call. In the middle of it, those in the room hear the president's voice change. "My God," Roosevelt says, "there's another wave of Japanese planes over Hawaii right this minute." In 3 hours, he has not made a sound like that. Out in the hallway, on a bench, sits Edward R. Murrow of CBS News. He had been invited to dinner at the White House. The dinner is not happening, but no one has sent him home. He sits, watches the procession of men in and out of the study. He overhears things. A voice directed at Knox. "God damn it, sir. You ought not to be in charge of a rowboat, let alone the United States Navy. He does not publish it. He only records it." The advisors leave around 4:15 p.m. Roosevelt asks Grace Tully to come to the study. When she enters, the room is quiet in a way it has not been since morning. He is alone with his cigarette. He leans back in the chair, takes a long drag, and looks, for a moment, at nothing. Then he begins to dictate. He already knows what he wants to say. He inhales deeply on the cigarette, now blows out the smoke, and starts in the same calm tone he uses to deal with his mail, enunciating each word incisively, carefully specifying each punctuation mark, each new paragraph. There is no consulting of notes. The State Department's 17-page draft, a careful rehashing of years of diplomatic history that someone spent the afternoon preparing, will not survive the evening. "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, he begins, "a date which will live in world history." Tully writes it down. Later, when the draft is on paper, Roosevelt takes a pencil. He looks at the phrase, "world history." He crosses it out. Above it, in his own hand, he writes one word. Infamy. World history is an observation. Infamy is a verdict. It names the moral character of the act, not merely its scale. And it was chosen alone in a quiet room, 3 hours after Roosevelt learned his fleet had been devastated, written above crossed-out words on a yellow legal pad, with a cigarette burning somewhere nearby, and only one other person in the room. The word that billions of people would come to know was found in those conditions. Before the president speaks publicly, Eleanor Roosevelt goes on the radio. She tells the nation that the Japanese ambassador was talking to the president at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii. The ambassadors, Nomura and Kurusu, were in fact waiting in Hull's outer office during the bombing. Hull did not receive them until roughly 2:20 p.m. Even at the top of the command structure, on the day itself, the information is still moving faster than anyone can fully verify. There is one thing Washington does not yet know. No, the fleet carriers are not in the harbor. The USS Enterprise, the Lexington, the Saratoga, at sea by chance. Weather delayed one. Another is on a delivery mission to Midway. The Japanese attack, planned for months and executed by 414 aircraft from 6 carriers, has struck Battleship Row, the most visible target, the row of capital ships that represents American naval power in every photograph ever taken of Pearl Harbor. In less than 90 minutes, 19 warships are destroyed or damaged, over 2,400 men killed, nearly 300 aircraft destroyed on the ground. But the carriers are somewhere in the open ocean, intact. Japan has struck everything it aimed for and missed the weapons that will eventually destroy it. Neither Washington nor Tokyo grasps this yet. The battleship age is ending. No one on either side is ready to believe it. Across the Atlantic, Churchill receives the news and does not grieve. He promises a British declaration of war on Japan within the hour and heads for the door. He will write later that he went to sleep that night knowing we had won after all. While Washington absorbs the worst military day in American history, London understands that full American involvement, the thing Churchill worked toward for 2 years, has arrived. The men at Pearl Harbor during all of this, the men under the planes in the smoke, are Admiral Husband E. Kimmel and Lieutenant General Walter C. Short. They are not figures in this Washington story. They are its consequence. They are the men Stark did not call. Within days of the attack, they are relieved of command and demoted. And they spend years seeking a formal court-martial, a proceeding that would put all the evidence on the record that might establish what Washington knew and when and what it chose not to pass on. They do not get it. By an act of Congress after the war, every senior officer is retired at the highest rank held during the conflict. Every officer except 2. Kimmel and Short alone are stripped of the rank they had earned. Congress eventually votes to restore their ranks posthumously. No president acts on it. Senator Strom Thurmond will call them, years later, the 2 final victims of Pearl Harbor. The men who were in Washington that Sunday, Marshall, Stark, Knox, Stimson, Roosevelt, go on to the positions history records them in. Marshall becomes what Churchill will call the organizer of victory. Stark commands U.S. Naval Forces Europe. Roosevelt is memorialized across the American capital. Their names are carved into things. Edward R. Murrow, the journalist who spent that evening on a bench in the hallway, will later be asked about the faces he saw. By the time he is asked, the suggestion has taken shape that the shock in that building was not real, that someone inside knew. Murrow was in the building. He studied those faces with a journalist's precision. There was amazement and anger written large on most faces. He will say, "I could not believe it then, and I cannot do so now." And then there is the telegram. It arrives in Honolulu at 7:33 a.m. on December 7th. The attack begins at 7:55. Marshall drafted it that morning after he returned from his ride, urgently, knowing even as he wrote it that time was running out. But he sent it by commercial Western Union rather than telephone because a call might expose the broken diplomatic code. The message reads, "Japanese are presenting at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today what amounts to an ultimatum. Be on alert accordingly." It arrives in Honolulu without any marking to indicate urgency. Nothing on the envelope suggests it is different from any other message. It is handed to a messenger at the telegraph office, a 24-year-old Japanese-American man named Tadao Fuchikami, working a temporary job, who picks it up with a batch of morning deliveries and heads out on his 1938 Indian Scout motorcycle to begin his rounds. He has several stops before Fort Shafter. He arranges them to save time and backtracking, the way he always does. Then, as he rides toward the fort, he can see columns of smoke rising from Pearl Harbor, enormous columns, black and oily, climbing into the clear December sky. People on the streets are pointing. Word is only just beginning to spread. Fuchikami rides on. There's nothing on the envelope to tell him what is inside. He is a messenger on his route. He delivers the telegram to Fort Shafter. He makes a few more stops. Getting home takes longer than usual. Police roadblocks have gone up across the island, and he works his way through them. He eventually reaches his neighborhood, parks the motorcycle, and the morning ends. The telegram is decoded and carried to General Short that afternoon, hours after the harbor has stopped burning. 10 years pass. Then Tadao Fuchikami finds out what was in the envelope. He had wondered about it for a long time, had known, and after the FBI questioned him in the days following the attack, that the message must have mattered. But he did not know how or what it said, until a news story reached him a decade later. "I was shocked to find out it was a warning," he said. "The most powerful army in the world sent its warning by commercial telegram. It arrived during the disaster it was meant to prevent. It was carried by a man who had no idea what he was carrying, riding through the smoke toward a fort already under attack, doing his job the way he always did, because nothing on the envelope told him this one was different. The date that will live in infamy ends here. Not in the speech, not in the declaration of war, not in the photographs of burning ships. On a motorcycle, a column of smoke on the horizon, an ordinary envelope, carried by a man who wouldn't know its meaning for 10 more years."